welcome back to my channel. Now we're on to part 7 of carrying on reviewing Empire of Normality from where I got up to last time in part 6. So I just got up to the bit when I was talking about Galton and I was wondering whether or not Galton was autistic, because it's possible, because he was very obsessive. So I was thinking, might be autistic. Would that be rather ironic if a eugenicist was autistic, the very eugenics that is the subject of this critique? Pretty funny, wouldn't it? Anyway, so Chapman goes on to talk about the significance of productivity, where energy is the capacity for labour. And this was seen as being consistent with all of the robust virtues, where energy is seen as the measure of the fullness of life, no energy is equated with death, and the so-called idiots, that was the term used back then for people with cognitive disabilities, were seen as listless. Higher productivity was associated with racial superiority as well. This naturalised class structures as social position was seen as a consequence of the individual's mental ability, and a natural hierarchy of talent was created, which was seen to result in a social hierarchy of occupation. So this was all heavily associated with someone's genes. It was naturalised, it was seen as scientific and objective, natural. So he talks about Emil Kraepelin, who's a 19th century psychiatrist, who expanded the scope of Galton's paradigm to bring in a new scientific psychiatry. This expanded the approach that Galton had developed to study intelligence. This would now encompass every other aspect of mind, providing a basis for psychiatry and for a variety of roles in relation to the shifting needs of capital in education, work, etc., resulting in a greater understanding of a wide range of dysfunctions that could then be treated and controlled. The emphasis on control is very much Robert Chapman places a great emphasis on this idea that psychiatry wanted to control mental illness. So not just treating mental illness, treating sounds nice and benign, doesn't it? But controlling mental illness. That's very much the subject of this book. And as I was saying in the other videos, that while yes, we can undoubtedly say there has been an element of control in psychiatry in the past, and it has had links with eugenics, it does seem rather far-fetched to me to say that psychiatry as a whole, in the modern age in particular, is about social control. That's where I disagree with Chapman. I think that's just very far-fetched to claim that. So Chapman argues that the ends of psychiatry was very much normalisation and improvement. He links this in with the pathology paradigm. It was seen as preventive psychological medicine for combating all... Okay, this is a quote from Kraepelin, by the way. Kraepelin's quote here, the psychiatrist Kraepelin. Preventive psychological medicine for combating all those mischiefs we group under the head of mental degeneracy. Bearing in mind, of course, that Kraepelin was heavily influenced by eugenics, but it doesn't mean that all of psychiatry is, just because Kraepelin was. Kraepelin wanted to bring in what he called mass psychiatry, using statistics. Kraepelin argued that an ever widening stream of inferior stock and mixing itself with our offspring. He saw the normal mind as being grounded in a political project of biological and cultural control. So that's what Kraepelin believed. Kraepelin was a eugenicist, and he heavily borrowed from Galton. Chapman argues that this began the still ongoing project. So this is the bit that is rather contentious, the still ongoing project. We can all agree that Kraepelin was not a particularly savoury character, to put it mildly. Influenced by eugenics, influenced by Galton, very racist and hierarchical. We can all agree that, but it's a big claim to say that this is a still ongoing project, which is what Chapman argues. That Kraepelin began a still ongoing project of dividing up mental disorders into different levels of subnormal functioning, with a focus on heredity and severity. Chapman makes the point, the correct point, this is indeed the case, that eugenics was widespread on both the left and the right, because often people on the left like to conveniently forget how eugenics was actually cross-political. There were many left-wing, even socialist people who were heavily influenced by eugenics. It was cross-political. Now, eugenics influenced policy. For example, the separation of children into different schools, grammar schools and secondary modern. Grammar schools were actually based on Cyril Burt. Cyril Burt was a eugenicist, and he argued that intelligence is innate and heritable. And Cyril Burt was very much behind the introduction of grammar schools. I mean, this idea that you can kind of rank children, according to somehow innate intelligence, and implying that those who go to grammar schools are destined for a life of academia and professional jobs, high-paying jobs. Those who went to secondary modern were seen as only suitable for kind of menial, low-skilled occupations. Is a product of eugenics. We mustn't forget that. Suggesting that you're sort of marked for life. This is your direction. So again, Chapman talks about the emergence of autism in Nazi Austria. During a war period where men were expected to express soldier mentality and be part of a group, boys who failed to fit this economic requirement were singled out. So this is where autism was originally located, in Nazi Austria. There is indeed a book, by the way, called Asperger's Children, which I have read, which goes into this in a lot of detail. If you want to find out more about that, so I recommend that book. The Nazis began dividing autistics up into those deemed to have potential worth and those to be killed. And it was usually boys who were described as being autistic. Girls were not usually described as being autistic at that time. They were described as having other disorders. Now, after the Nazi atrocities, Kraepelinian biological psychiatry came to be seen as tainted for its association with eugenics. So, Freudian psychoanalysis and behaviourism, which were seen as alternatives to biological psychiatry at the time, became dominant in the 1950s. Now, Chapman then goes on to talk about the core assumptions of the so-called pathology paradigm, where mental functioning is seen as individual and based on natural abilities. and can be ranked in relation to a statistical norm across the species. He says that Galton was the co-founder of that. He says that the neurotypical mind was enthroned as the normal ideal. But he does make it clear that eugenic theory is not synonymous with the pathology paradigm. So he does make it clear that eugenic theory is not synonymous with the pathology paradigm, even though he says that they are heavily interlinked, but they are at the same time separate, he says. Closely entwined but not identical. He says the pathology paradigm does not necessarily commit to the idea that race, for example, can be improved at the group level. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2 now. The next video, which will now be part 7 in the series, but moving on to the next video to carry on, looking at Empire of Normality. So moving on to the next video now.